Where do we go next? I mean, I have a lot of big dreams for what can be envisioned here. We next steps are to continue to invest in our platform, to figure out how to work with groups like yourselves, groups producing different media. Anything that's going to be the intersection on the marketing side is where we're focused for now, to try to pull them into an easier user interface, an easier process for marketing teams. We know that marketing teams are strapped with limited budgets, limited people, and anything that we can do to alleviate some of those pain points, I think, is going to be a really large net positive for groups today.
Okay, welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reed.
Reed, do we like Grady more than we like all of our other interviews at conferences?
Definitely not.
Okay. That's why he gets an intro?
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how to say that, like, we got behind. We didn't do intros on everybody. So some stuff didn't get intros. Grady did get an intro, and that must mean something.
Yeah. Just that we're getting caught up.
Yeah.
Less about, like, Grady. No, Grady's awesome. And I feel like, pretty well known in the industry. So maybe I was behind on that one, but obviously got some good time with them when we were out at RentCon at the Mixer, and I didn't even know, but I recognized the name, and then we started chatting. I was drawn in pretty quickly. He's just an engaging personality, big ideas, which obviously I get a kick out of. So he sucked me in fast, and then shared more specifically his company and his position and thinking around, websites, the problems that still need to be solved, and how he's helping go about it. And I just remember feeling motivated, just energized from the whole conversation, and was glad that we were able to carry that through to the podcast.
Yeah, I feel that way anytime we meet someone, which has been more and more recently, but someone that is willing to be so speak so freely. Like a lot of, like in the past, I had felt more cagey with different folks and whatnot, and Grady is quickly like, here's what I think, this is my opinion, and we even talked to him later about franchising, right? And so it's like, I love that he has an opinion.
Yeah.
And it's like there's never one right answer anyways. So I love hearing all these different angles.
Yep. And I think he kind of seemed to connect, and I want to say it was during the pandemic. I'm trying to remember how much of that was what had him move off of or pivot from his first company. And you might remember better what that was pointed at.
I think it was something in the green space.
It was. Yeah. Let's just leave it there because we'll probably butcher it. But websites in general is not an idea, and maybe the problems and the ways attacking it aren't as interesting or exciting as what he was doing with the green stuff. But the franchising, I'm kind of jumping now to this other, is a huge idea. And he brought it up, I think, at AIM, and just kind of questioned, why hasn't this happened? But I just am saying this dude's going to connect at some point, like he's building up a great network. He's loaded with ideas, and I feel like he's also pretty nimble in getting to market with them. So at some point lightning will strike, and I think it's going to be fun when it does,
And it seems like it's already doing really well with Resi. Anyways, I hear.
Yeah, he's having success there.
Yeah, for sure. So just want to be clear for him.
What is your, I'll say, recollection of Resi's unique or whatever USP or value prop? Like, I can't call it up this instant, so I'm just wasn't sure if you.
Well, his vision is similar to what we've talked about, kind of with a marketing operating system style vein, but he believes there should be a centralized platform to manage.
Yeah, call it a platform, right?
Yeah, and so he, websites are one of the biggest challenges that he had in past life, and simple things like, does your concession feed through? Do you want your concession to say something different than the ILS? Like, there are little things like that that most of the current platforms don't allow, and so he saw that as like, I definitely want to solve this issue. And then that just, you get sucked deeper and deeper, right? Into like, great, well, there's not great pop-ups, they're not automated, or you want to show this floor plan differently, you want to, yada yada. So there are gaps that, like, the big incumbents, I think, are aware of, but as we've seen, it gets really hard for any of the large companies when it's already working. It's like, okay, do we need to get that complex? Because the amount of, like, integration work, and the user experience is what's challenging too. Like if you're trying to support like 3 or 4 different PMS systems and the different ways that their specials feed in or floor plans feed in or pricing feeds in, and you want it this way versus that way. Yeah, it's just a lot of like switches to flip, you know.
It is, and I think I'm going to make your day by telling you what I'm reading now. And I don't know, I almost am going to say what year you read this because you've been referencing Innovator's Dilemma to me for a long time. So speaking of like, you're going to need to reread. I am all in, like I'm loving it.
Good.
And I see all these applications to the industry and to Digible and to other companies, but I'll use this as my first plug or mention of it. But one of my favorite, I'll say principles, is the notion of your capabilities either become or are your disabilities, from the book. And that just hit me like a freaking anvil. I was like, so I could say this about us, but I'll use the website since we're talking about Grady and websites. But you just said it. They're aware, the incumbents. They know that there's some of these things, but is it worth the effort? And it's not even necessarily filling the gaps, but it could require or should some real innovation, and that in order to do that, like they have disabled that capability to make some of those needed changes, because of the way that they've scaled and the way they've matured. And I think there's some truth to that for us, where it's like maybe how we've built this company and built, I'll use like our paid media department, that has created some disability to do like real innovation or disruptive technology. It literally prevents you, is like the bold kind of, I guess, position that the I forget the author, but yeah, that he says. And if you really examine like where you are plateauing or slowing down or not breaking through or not innovating, it's often the root cause is your capabilities, which is such a, for me, I'm just eating up like some of the almost heavy philosophy, but then the backing behind it. There's several other, I at first was like, oh, it's just one innovator's dilemma. It's like, no, there's all sorts of like examples, and where he'll be like, this is the innovator's dilemma. And then you read a few more pages and he's like, this is the innovator's dilemma. So I'm also appreciating that it's layered. There is a general like overarching idea behind it, but then, he has different layers to what causes that. So anyways, I'm just geeking out. I'm about probably 6 chapters in. So stay tuned, but I know this is one you've referenced for a long time.
I will have to dust it off. I know we need to finish this intro, but I got to take the opportunity because we have referenced Southwest a ton of times. And but right now Southwest is going through challenges. So it had whatever over 40 years of profits, best performing airline, but it had invented the low fare, right? Kind of like the Greyhound bus for the sky. But as they have done in the past, shoot, what was his name? What was the guy's name?
Herb.
Yeah. Like Herb had always
Keller,
said, do the 20-mile march, save profits so that when there's a downturn, you invest when everyone else is pulling back. And that happened for them in the pandemic. Pandemic hit, so it's a downturn. So they're like, great, let's run the playbook, invest. So they open up like 13 or 18 cities or something. But what was a little bit different than sometimes in the past is the other airlines took a bunch of government money and they didn't. And then the other airlines, so they didn't pull back as much as they normally would have in
just
the past.
like Ford with
just like Ford. And then also there's some other low cost carriers like Spirit and Frontier that were starting to like come through. Well, anyways, more recently, Southwest's stock price is down like 25%, and they have an activist investor that has come in and is like saying, great, time to charge for bags, time to add hot meals. And they're like, they're getting like serious pressure from this to basically blow up their smack recipe. And it's tough. And I think when you finish the book, we should do a whole episode talking about this because it is the like, don't screw with what's working, right? But also innovator's dilemma. It could be, and there could be something there with Southwest. But also it's like, if just one time it didn't work, doesn't mean it's a bad strategy, right? To invest in a downturn. It's like, great, okay, well, we keep plodding along, right?
Mhm,
They didn't
mhm,
overextend,
mhm.
so they're still profitable.
Mhm.
It's all fine.
Mhm.
So it's just really interesting.
And it even gets to the boiling frog, like another one of your favorites, and that's not.
Have you read that children's book yet?
I was going to say I don't think that's a book, and if it is, it probably is a children's book.
It's
But
like a fable.
I know it's a fable, and I do you remember at the summit that I proved
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah,
Adam
yeah,
Grant's like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not actually true.
Yeah.
I had so much joy. I got so much joy out of that. But let's pretend it is still true. That is part of the innovator's dilemma, is that by the time you do realize it's too late. And meaning with Southwest, if you don't recognize that and you do try to cling, and when I say cling, I think it's super amazing, powerful that they've held to that smack recipe for 2-3 decades. But there is a point, where it doesn't work or it won't work. And because of this innovator's dilemma, that's often how people get caught, not necessarily flat-footed, but don't thread the needle, as we often say. And I also thought was interesting is they were like, this is not because they don't invest, these big companies, in innovation. It's that they're pointing it the wrong direction, the wrong place. And it's often because they're trying to expand on their current capabilities instead of like the true disruptive technology that often overshoots the market. They're like, just know that when that disruptive technology comes along, and it made me think about Fiona, is like, you're not gonna, it won't appear to have product market fit. And what do you think happens with big shops when they overshoot or don't get product market fit? They move on, they move away, they don't stay the course. And if you really want to innovate, you have to stay the course, even when the market's telling you got it wrong.
That's interesting.
And that's not easy to do, both from a cash flow as well as like, just an operating, like, that feels irresponsible, you could say. And so they talk about splitting off companies, all this stuff. I mean, just so fascinating, such a good book so far. So yeah, I'm ready to obviously geek out with you on it.
Cool. Well, we know that you guys also, we think, geek out on the rest of this episode. Grady is a gem. So thanks.
And he's the disruptive technology.
Yeah.
So watch out. I won't name names, but like he's the disruptor in this case. And I hope he crushes. Like I said, hope lightning strikes.
So stick with it, Grady. Yeah.
Go get him, brother.
All right. We're here with Grady from Resi. Grady, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Grady Newman from Resi. Started this company back in 2015. We are a multifamily marketing platform, primarily focused on websites and provide SEO and digital ad services as well.
Tell us what brought you here. Like, how did you arrive at starting a company in the space?
Oh, well, this is my second company in the space.
Oh, that's actually new to me.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't know that? I got that last night from him.
Damn it,
super interesting.
Grady.
And he's multi-generation. So
I did know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So my dad was in the real estate sphere. I knew I wanted to do something in the space, but I had to do something different, of course. So my first business out of school was an energy efficiency, renewable energy consultancy, working with private ownership groups to implement anything from lighting to solar. My interest was, how do we get renewables implemented, and figuring out how to do that by pairing them with, the low-hanging fruit, as they say.
Got it.
Industry. And 2009 to 2012 was a tough time to get private ownership groups to spend dollars on, especially something that was pretty new, even though we were putting together some pretty sexy looking projects, 30% IRRs with guaranteed energy savings, but it was still just very new. And so we were doing okay, but I wasn't seeing the kind of growth that I wanted to as a young, hungry entrepreneur. So I shifted gears, and I'd always been kind of a comp sci nerd and really enjoyed website building, and taught myself how to do that for this industry. Learned everything there was to know about marketing, dove right in, worked with some developers really closely. I was doing everything from flying the drone outside the property, when there wasn't even a hole yet, to figure out how to help them market an asset that didn't exist, through DJing opening parties for the property. I've kind of done it all, and figured out pretty quickly that the area we could add the most value was in the website sphere. So that's what I focused on. And after a couple of years of building it, grew up our portfolio large enough where it was getting to be a big pain point to have to try to manage all of these websites and log into the back end of them each individually. And that was during the time about 2017, 2018, when specials were rampant and we were having to change them every week, and became a pain point for us. So we created a platform to centralize all that. And that is what is now kind of translated itself into Resi today, as we've moved more and more of the website content onto a single platform. And that's how I got here today.
Yeah, so you started wanting to save the world, and then you decided let's build websites.
I found it a lot easier to sell websites to the same people with absolutely no promise of a return.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I mean, Reed and I talk about this all the time. It's like, we do love the work we do, but we're also like, there are times when we're like, how come we're not saving the planet? And so it's just a struggle, like as you start a company. Well, I love
I have to, if you don't mind, because on that point, what is the purpose of Resi? Like, how do you inspire people to work for you? Like, get them excited. Yeah.
How do I inspire people to work for me? That's a great question. I really try to envision a brighter future that is creating more affordable housing, creating better communities, and figuring out how can we just do a little bit today and take one step forward towards that. And that is by improving the renter experience today, creating value in brand. That's what we see across other industries, is when that is done, that creates a better experience overall for the customer. And that's how we can create a better world. My goal being to eventually return to trying to create value with sustainability initiatives. And it's such a platform that I think multifamily owners have today, and they don't necessarily view it in that way. I think they're starting to, right? As they're looking at a lot of ancillary revenue streams that they can take advantage of. But there's so much more. You have a captive audience that will listen to you. And I think there's a lot that can be done with that. And so I try to create a vision of the future that we can have a part of that.
That's very cool.
I'm gonna take us way off track. You know what you should do? Like every design that you show for your websites, you should be trying to inch the amount of black space up on the website. Do you know Blackle? No. So Google's default is white, and white takes more energy for the monitor to produce. So there's a company, Blackle, that just skinned Google to be black, and they always showed how much energy they were saving, like per day, per year, because they were skinning Google to be black. So your little way could just be like turning every website black.
I love it. Sustainable websites.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Great connection.
So Grady, I love the platform you've built. I think you guys have done a lot of really deep work on the integration side and fundamentals that maybe people don't see. So things like handling the ILS feed management, like being able to handle concessions, like what concessions show, what don't show, what pricing shows, what doesn't show. So I think there's, when you say websites, it can almost diminish how much work you guys have done on the back end. So I more just wanted to call that out because I think it's phenomenal, a lot of the effort you put in there. But let's talk about, like, so what have you solved today as you see it? Like what customers come to you, why? And then let's talk about what does the future hold? Like where does Resi go?
Certainly, great question. I think the problem that we've solved today, are continuing to solve today, I will say.
Yeah. Nice caveat.
is we started with new lease ups. That is like where our bread and butter, where we cut our teeth. And to do that, we needed to be able to have a lot of customization in our sites. Trying to figure out how to pull that into larger portfolios and maintain the scalability and systems that they need to be able to operate well has been the key for us. And I think that's the problem we're continuing to solve, is flexibility versus scalability. How do we create a product that's customizable enough to target particular audiences and speak to an individual market while still being consistent in how you manage it and how you manage those integrations and on the data side.
Cool.
And then what was the second part of that question?
Yeah, where do you go next?
Where do we go next? I have a lot of big dreams for what can be envisioned here. We next steps are to continue to invest in our platform, to figure out how to work with groups like yourselves, groups producing different media. Anything that's going to be the intersection on the marketing side is where we're focused for now, to try to pull them into an easier user interface, an easier process for marketing teams. We know that marketing teams are strapped with limited budgets, limited people, and anything that we can do to alleviate some of those pain points, I think is going to be a really large net positive for groups today.
How do you define success for customers as they come on board? It's like, this is you mentioned like the problem that you're continuing to solve, not fully solved. You mentioned to me offline last night just about, the organic traffic boosting, which obviously is a huge benefit to any property, but If you had to narrow it down and say, this is the metric that you should be paying attention to and that you'll see benefit as a result of bringing on our platform, what would that be?
Another great question. I think that, well, I always like to ask our clients that question when we were first starting to work together. How do
Smart
they
guy.
define success?
Yeah.
Of course.
Love the redirect.
Right? And,
Yeah.
that's important. We want to understand that when we're first starting off with a client. But the things that I would encourage them to consider success are taking more ownership over their data today. And that means trying to figure out how to utilize these multiple platforms and pull all of those into their own analytics that they own, and having transparency into any third-party systems that they are working with, working more and more towards a customer data platform. I know we don't really have a successful model for that yet. I know plenty are chasing it, but that's how I would ultimately define success. If you can own that data, then you really have the power to analyze it. And
Lively was just telling us something similar as far as the value that they bring and all the data and the insights. And they actually seem like they have an arm. We didn't get super far with it, but that helps with the analysis itself. I'm guessing that's not where you guys are today. You're counting on a business analyst like with the customers you're working with to be able to mine through that data that you're delivering and make use out of it. Because it just seems like that's one of the things we hear a lot from different tech companies that are coming in is, we're going to give you control and visibility into your data, but, and understandably often stop short of actually doing some of the analysis for them. And so that's a handoff at this point, right? For Resi.
to some extent, that's probably how we
Or you
had
guys,
some early success, is because that's something that I knew pretty well. I found a lot of my conversations early on with our clients were helping to translate between marketing teams and asset management teams, and helping to dive into that data and make recommendations. It's hard to scale that business. And, we continue to do that some today. I have a great interest in either finding tools that exist or that others are building to integrate into our system to help dive into that data, because ultimately it's a lot of information and it's hard for any group to understand what to do with it. We don't need more data. We need actionable insights. And that's something that I'd love to be focusing on.
well, it's easy, right? You just dump it all into a smoothie and then ChatGPT answers everything.
Right?
It
Yeah.
solves everything, At least that's what people seem to think right now.
I totally agree. Our piece of the puzzle we're trying to solve right now is just at least figuring out where there's black holes of data and pulling that back into.
I'll let you
Into
go,
the
but
light.
I want to get some.
Well, no, I just wanted to ask on your point there. What do you think, the three of us, what do we think the impact of that is going to be? Like, people now have, so it used to be, I'd say like a decade ago, they're like AI, machine learning, magic. And then people got really burned oh, this is, smoke and mirrors. Now, like ChatGPT has broken through so well. I feel that people are starting to retrust it again. And now, it's put some sparkle back on AI and machine learning. And now they're like, oh, it can solve the world again. But I do, like, in all of these kinds of waves, as I've witnessed in the past, you have some people that come in and it's more smoke and mirrors again. So I'm just wondering what the impact of that is. Meaning, will people have more faith in the data, or will it, continue to sort of like go that direction where people now look at it sideways?
Do you want to answer that first?
Well, I think we don't want to have too much faith in it too quickly. I think as an industry in general, we can all agree we have kind of shiny object syndrome and love to chase the newest and brightest thing. It's not bad. We want to find new technologies that are going to help level up our game, but we don't want to invest in it too heavily. We need to know what the value of it, of the data is today. And that's where I'm nervous and apprehensive that the industry is going to get a little ahead of itself. Certainly.
Yeah, I think that they have, and I could be soon contributing maybe to that problem, because I'm already asking our CTO why. I just put this to him over the weekend. I was like, why wouldn't we lean in? And it was based on what you sent over to him with that workflow AI.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like there's just so much that is unnecessary that now GPT and generative AI can solve for. And so I'm more struggling to know why not. And maybe I need to have that example of what you were talking about, kind of the first round of AI, where it's like things started to go off the rails or people got ahead of themselves. and that slowed things down. But based on some of the use cases and things I'm seeing right now with it, it just seems like there is so much low-hanging fruit that there's no reason. It's just you have to be more structured, more deliberate about it, and that's where I think people can go wrong. Is they just want to feed everything, and they're not really organizing a strategy, and that's something that I think is critical if you're going to have success with that. But I did want to turn that into a question. I could tell David has another one, but just you grabbed my attention as far as your thoughts on bots and websites. So I want to leave room for that. But what were you going to?
Well, I was just going to say, like, we even witness it in our own company where we build some sort of BI and we're like, hey, look, here's the data. And then if our employees catch one like little mistake with the data, they're like, oh, this dashboard's trash. And it's hard to get them to rebuy into the dashboard again. Now, if we trace it back, a lot of times it's like, well, that's the data in the PMS. And it's like, oh, the PMS had dirty data. And so if you start with dirty data, it comes all the way, everything you build off of it's dirty. And so that's why I'm saying, like, it's easy to get disenchanted. But just because we had one disenchantment before doesn't mean it should be permanent. So somehow culturally, we need to find a way, both internally with our employees as well as with the industry, to say, like, yeah, but let's try again. It doesn't mean let's stick our head back in the sand. Let's go back to like printing apartment guide books instead of like being online, right? Like, you still got to keep trying and failing until it sticks.
I think you have to create the safety with employees, like in those scenarios, that if it goes off the rails, because they're thinking, well, this falls back on me. It's going to be a reflection on me, and nobody's going to want to hear about the AI or the bad data. It's like, I screwed this up. And of course, we are promoting heavily right now, like accountability and ownership. And so it makes people, I think, hesitant, to really fully adopt and embrace and overlook maybe some of those early, mistakes that AI generates, and embrace it, like get past that point.
Right.
So I think it's critical, like for operators that are really like on board with this, to give that, we say, psychological safety, but just and celebrate like when those things have been discovered, instead of like shame somebody or like start getting really negative and sour on tech.
So I will segue this into where you want to go with Grady, but what it reminds me of is the story of Bill Gates when he was, because obviously he still has a large interest in Microsoft, who then made the large investment in OpenAI for ChatGPT. But when they were first bringing it to him, he looked at it skeptically, and he's like, let's see what this toy can do. He wasn't they didn't come to him and say, we've got AI figured out, here you go. And he also was, had enough experience to be like, let's see what it can do. And then he set a benchmark. He's like, well, come back to me when it can pass the AP, was it biology exam or whatever? And like, then they came back to him within 6 months and it passed the exam, and he was like, okay. So now it's been blown away. So I think it's important for all of us to say, put that line in the sand to say, like, I'll play with it as a toy or in this way until it can do this. And once it can do that, that's your first impression, right? Like, you don't want your first impression to be Gates's first impression with ChatGPT, where it's like, man, this thing freaking hallucinates like out of the gate, right? So he set that bar, and then he wiped his brain. And was like, this is the new, it can pass the AP biology exam, so let's run with it. So that,
I think that's spot on.
It's a great segue. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's spot on. I couldn't agree more. We just need to take some smaller bites, right? We can't just throw all of the data in and expect it to come out pretty, right? Like, how would you guys explain to a client today that asks, like, well, how are we getting our leases, or why is this property not leasing up? And if you're only looking at just digital advertising data, and it's like, well, there are so many factors at play here. You can't just throw it all in and expect a system to spit it all out. It doesn't understand all those pieces. I think we need to take small bites and look to figure out how do those then small bites slowly connect to each other before we can toss it all into a pot and have something magical come out. I don't think that exists.
Yeah, but I hate tapas. Just to get to the main course, Reed.
Yeah.
No family style for you?
We did family style last night. It was fine, but afterwards, you don't know this. Trevor went and got pizza afterwards. That's what shared plates do to you.
If I had known, I would have been right there next to him.
Yeah,
you're the
should
king
have
of
seen
that,
our
right?
table full last night. Not a spare inch.
I love it. Well, I think one more thing on this with the AI and like those small bites and milestones is the training. You used to hear about that a lot. I hear less about it with ChatGPT. It's more about the prompts, prompt engineering versus like training the AI. Then that's one of the biggest like jumps forward that it delivers, because when you used to talk about AI, it's like, oh, you have to have people training it so that it and even with the understanding that it will train itself on some level. But when you mentioned like throwing everything in there and it just sorting it out, I think people right now are under the impression that that's what it's capable of, because they don't hear as much about, somebody having to train it in those bite-sized, like kind of, I guess approach that you're talking about, like as you're staging into it. And that if you just use the right prompt engineering, it can figure everything out on its own, which just isn't realistic. So I don't know if I can make the jump or the connection back to where I wanted to go with the bots, but I think we just heard last night that one of the AI leasing agents is now at a point where it's like low 90s as far as all that it can deliver, like for a leasing agent, meaning cut out, which is extraordinary, because we were hearing just 2 years ago that it was closer to 60% before a handoff had to happen to a human. And now that could be, in the low 90s, as far as all that's accomplishing, and then moving beyond just the website to more of a full end-to-end solution, that's staying with you through, your stay at an apartment. So being that websites and that's the platform that, is at the core of what you're doing right now, what's your take on these AI leasing agents and bots? Like, do you think it's table stakes for a website platform and providers? It's like you either are integrating or you have to build your own bot, because this is now the expectation of the industry.
Great question. Ultimately, they will disappear long term.
I love this. I'm leaning forward, Grady.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to somebody that builds websites. They will disappear at some point. Not yet. Probably faster than you'd think, though. Looking back to 10 years ago and how I was approaching business, and everything felt like it was taking 5 times longer than I wanted it to. And now I still want things to move fast, but I think things are happening quite a bit faster than I expect, including my company's growth, including the industry's growth. It's happening faster, and AI is only going to expand on that. So yeah, I think that they will disappear, and that's why we as a company haven't invested in trying to create our own bot. I looked at that as it's a band-aid solution to some extent. One, I think that the use of a chatbot on a site today is primarily driven by just poor design, and that's one reason that they succeed. My opinion, most chatbots that exist were and primarily used for support more than sales, and also that's putting in a lot of investment into an interface that I think won't have a long-term value to it. There's only going to be a few winners in the AI space in the long run, and I don't want to try to beat them today. I don't think we will beat them.
Yeah, so I think what you're operating from is, you said, on a long enough time horizon, right? So I think that's always important to establish. You're not saying in 6 months, and you're not saying they don't add value over the next 6 months or a year. And you also have, it sounds like, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're sort of thinking, I'm extrapolating, that that there's going to be one main AI assistant for your life, if you will, right? And if you have that, then why would you need a independent AI assistant for an apartment website or for a leasing agent? Or
even an apartment website, ultimately, right? On the little right time horizon.
Right.
So that's, getting into article that was published on your blog not too long ago, right? About GEO. And that's exactly where we've been trying to focus. Instead of trying to create our own system and our own interface, focusing on how do we create the data and put that in the right syntax, so that those systems can read it, and we're optimized for those interfaces. But ultimately, that's going to help position our clients in the best way possible.
So what do you imagine that world to look like? Like, if you were to play this timeline out, as you're imagining it, walk us through maybe the 3 chapters of what that looks like.
Oh, I was going to skip right to Trevor's story. I think he nailed it
right
before we sat down.
Okay.
The 3 chapters. Well, first is figuring out how to integrate the systems that are patched together today. There is a lot of data that's all over the place. Those systems don't talk super nicely together. I think that chapter 1 is how to play well together in the sandbox. Chapter 2 is we see AI technology continue to grow, and those interfaces could slowly become obsolete. And chapter 3 is what Trevor talked about, that the future search engine is, hey, I want to tour some apartments this Saturday. Help me find this. Describe what I want, what I need. Book the tours for me. Take me there. Read the reviews. Do all of the work for me. I don't want to do that searching. I don't want to analyze that data. Schedule the tours. Do it for me automatically. I want it between 9 and 12 on this Saturday. And put my itinerary in my calendar. That's chapter 3.
That's when Amazon finally gets serious about real estate. That's what I've been telling David. They could solve that in a hurry if they wanted to. Or get to that third chapter. I want to ask you a little more about the second chapter. So how do you imagine it, like, as you talk about these bots becoming obsolete because AI technology, like, I guess, closes the gap needed, like, within websites and just the renter journey, such that you wouldn't need that? How do you conceptualize that?
Well, I think it's that we're lean into the few winners in the AI space, that they will be the interface for that data before we have our fully autonomous interface that we each use personally. So first step is who's going to win in that space, investing in making your data ready for those platforms. And then finally being ready for having AI in our ear and doing it all automatically. So that second chapter will be an interesting one.
For sure.
And I think that we'll be surprised as to what happens.
Yeah. You mentioned flexibility and scalability, bringing it back to Resi and your platform. David and I often talk, or I have, about sizzle and substance. And this industry seems to favor sizzle more when it comes to websites, because they can't get over the look, the aesthetics. Right. And you mentioned some of the customization that you're trying to bring to the table. So how would you right now kind of classify the market between, like, focus on sizzle versus the substance? When I say substance, I mean less flexibility per se and more performance, which is, like, isn't the most important thing about a website its conversion rate, not the way it looks, even feels, like, even the usability of it. It's like, I mean, you assume that has to be there in order for you to see better conversion rates, to see, better visibility on Google and all that. But yeah, can you just speak to us a little bit about sizzle versus substance and how you're thinking about it, and what you're seeing in the market?
That's a great question. I'm going to try to have a fun take on this one. Fully agree that there is a lot of sizzle, but in the end, we are in a human-centric industry, and we are humans, and humans like sizzle, even on websites.
For sure.
And that our decisions aren't fully rational, and that ultimately, are you finding the home that's fully optimized for your life, or are you sold on some aspects of it that are just because they look cool, or because you think they're awesome, or because of you were sold on it as being a great neighborhood or being the place to live? So if sizzle is going to sell a little bit to humanity, shouldn't it also still be incorporated into our tools that we're using to sell to them? I think so. I think absolutely you need substance there, and I think that they work well together and can.
I think that's what makes a company good versus great, right? Like, you have the companies that, like, walk that line well, where they have you can't be all sizzle and you can't be all substance. If you're all substance, a lot of people aren't going to want to try it, right? It's only broccoli, and it's like, that's really boring, right? So you need a little bit more sizzle, and I think the right companies, the great companies, figure out how to walk that line well. So
it's interesting, though, because as I've been reading these, or starting to read these product books that Alex, our head of product, turned us onto, it's all about the solving problems, right? And they advocate for not getting caught up at all about sizzle as you're, like, working through product development. It's like you're just trying to find problems to solve, and that may be in an ugly fashion, clunky, but that's where you should put most of your attention, and then you build the sizzle like, where it's a slick user interface and all that other stuff. I don't know if that's possible with websites.
Well, I think so. You're referring to Marty Kagan's books, and you've read.
Right.
I've read 3 of his books, but I haven't read the 4th book that you're reading. But his 3rd book is, I think it's Loved, and Loved, it talks about how to market a product.
Loved is another.
It's still Marty. He's like there's like a co-author on it.
Okay.
But it's part of his series on launching product.
Yeah.
But if you isolate too much on solving the problem, it's like you might have a great product that solves a problem, but your other problem is like, I gotta get customers to buy it. And almost to Grady's point, if there's no sizzle, customers may not buy it. So therefore you've solved no problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So you need that for the adoption curve.
True.
But I think on websites it is there. Like I've seen websites where a customer will be like, I want a new website. And I look at the conversions and I'm like, this thing converts pretty well. We should keep this thing. And they're like, but it's ugly as hell. I'm like, what's your goal here?
Yeah.
Is your goal leads or is your goal look cool?
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, well, the owner, it's more of an ego thing is what it comes down to, is the owner's like, I spent a lot of money on this building and I want the website, I want to be proud of the website. And he's not, they are not proud of the website. And so they want something that looks cooler. So Grady, I imagine you deal with that a lot where like you've had some stories. So would you share one with us?
Oh gosh, about design. Design is tough.
And how do you manage through this?
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants their opinion to be heard. And that's a really tough thing to manage. Partly why we've tried to become a little bit more of a platform, a little bit less of a design agency, because it is really hard to manage. It just takes time. And ultimately, I don't want to be in the business of selling our time, and that's not bringing value to anybody for us to just live in account management. So how do we manage that process? And a fun story. It's always the age-old story of somebody in the organization that wants things a particular way, and even though you've got the data to prove it, you need to have that tough conversation of, are you the target market? Are you your customer? Most cases not, because in most cases after the website's done, they don't go visit it on a mobile device to tell you how it's performing.
Yeah.
So that's what I like to bring back as a challenge, is say, well, how often are you visiting it? Have you visited your current website on mobile? How's that process work?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's reminding them. I think Scott from Jonah does a really great job of this too, because he starts every conversation where he's like, we're not a custom design shop. And he just like puts it right out there. He's like, if you're looking for custom design, it's on us. Go somewhere else, right? Or and then he tries to explain why he doesn't think that you need this custom design. And I think you guys are an interesting blend, because you give the customer this feeling of like, you have more control here, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, than you might have with some of these other folks that are less flexible. But you do stop at some point, whereas you said you're not going to be charging by the hour for like to just do another side of revision. So I just find it interesting to figure out how you take the stance on it. And the way Jonah's done it is they're just like, this is what it is, take it or leave it. And it's worked for them. Mm-hmm. And but obviously there are people that want a little bit more than that. And I think you guys are one of the solutions that offer that.
Well, thank you. I think, that's part of the problem we're trying to tackle is scalability and flexibility, not just with the design today, but also with where the industry moves, and that things change pretty fast in the marketing sphere. That's actually why I decided to go in this realm. I figured, what is one of the 80 modules that a property management software is offering that I can go try to tackle and do it just a little bit better than them? And figured marketing is an area that's changing faster than most of the other areas that they're focused on. And that's the other side where the flexibility comes into play, is that we are preparing for the next steps, preparing for AI systems, being ready for dynamic content, and how do we make our systems talk to each other? How do we update imagery based on the ads that were clicked, or what's performing best? Why can't we have our websites be run like a A/B testing, or like a Google ad that's just out there trying every combination to see what's best? That's where we were trying to focus on flexibility a little bit more as well.
Well, how much are you, I guess, introducing almost CRO? This is a hot foot for David. It's been for years, but that it seems more or less non-existent within, property websites. So how much is that built into your platform now?
How much is, I didn't hear the acronym.
CRO.
CRO, conversion rate optimization. Yeah.
It's built in that our teams are analyzing that. It's not automated. We are gearing up for that to be more automated. That's where the clean data comes into play. You need that centralized data system that doesn't really exist. We need a CDP to connect to. I'd say that we are building our system to be CDP ready. I really don't want to have to build it. I hope somebody else does, and that we can, connect into that information and utilize it, because that's the holy grail, right? Here's all this data. How can I improve this user interface? How can I personalize this website process? How can I make recommendations, floor plans? How can I make a CTA change from schedule a tour to apply now, because it knows that they've already been on the property and scheduled the tour? How can I personalize a landing page after a tour to say thanks for coming, and here's what you looked at, here's downloads of all the information that you need, and have that integrate with the other systems, the nurturing systems, the bots that exist.
I have one more question, but
sure.
So what's your position? Do you have a strong position? So it's kind of twofold on regional websites versus property websites. And then that leads to how much are you factoring now with this wave of centralization, as a trend in the industry for how you're building the platform?
We're trying to build for both very well, which is something that I don't think exists today in a great way. There is certainly a value of a property website. That is where the industry is used to going. That is where renters are used to going to getting the more detailed information. The few companies that exist that have a centralized system that do it well are focused on creating that brand value. And I think that there is that play long term, but I think it's got a long way to go. You can do it regionally. I think to develop that brand value nationally, nobody's quite there yet. There are a few companies that are approaching scale,
right.
But it's really hard with a third-party management company to get all the ownership groups on board with living under that flag,
right,
when they want their own property to be special, of course. So we're investing in creating a system that can be flexible from that standpoint too, where we can have a centralized corporate presence as well as an individual property site, or one or the other. Is how we're.
So you're trying to
today.
Provide optionality,
as
much
absolutely.
optionality as you can.
I think, having a private ILS, I think, is fantastic. I just don't know that anybody's quite at the scale yet where that's fully what a customer is going to want to expect, and to compete against the existing ILSs of the world, right? You need to have a very, very large presence.
Yeah, I think there's value in both for sure. But we've gone over here, so we're going to get yanked off stage. So we'll earmark that, and we can have Grady back on for a longer call. So anyways, Grady, thank you so much. If people want to learn more about Resi, what's the best way to do that?
Contact me. You can find me on LinkedIn, or go to our website at getresi.com.